I must start by disappointing you. I am not Ambassador Vera Alexander, but you will soon see her. I am Erin Koenig, the head of the public diplomacy section here at the embassy, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you, willkommen, bienvenue, to the 19th annual Marshall McLuhan Lecture, which we are so thrilled to be holding again with transmediale. It is not only the 19th edition of the lecture, but it is the 75th anniversary of the bilateral relationship between Germany and Canada, so we have much to celebrate. Without further ado, I would like to invite our ambassador to the stage. Ambassador Alexander, please.
Thanks so much, Erin. À vous tous, bienvenue ici à la Maison du Canada. A big welcome here to Canada House today. Willkommen. You are very, very welcome, and we're thrilled to have you here today, all of us. The Marshall McLuhan Lecture is a cornerstone of Canada's long-standing partnership with Transmediale. It's a celebration of creative, critical, and technological currents connecting Canada and Germany and the world. This year's theme is AI sovereignty, and it is an issue I'm discussing or listening to discussions about almost everywhere I go. And there are different meanings, and so I'm fascinated to be able to hear tonight from our panelists about their views in this space and what this means. Marshall McLuhan, after whom this lecture is named, was a Canadian scholar, and he understood, I would call him a philosopher as well, actually, but he understood that technology doesn't simply serve society, it reshapes us. And he reminded us that we become what we behold. In this age of artificial intelligence, it seems less theoretical and more of a warning, or maybe it's an invitation. Canada and Germany this year, as Erin mentioned, are celebrating our 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations. We have a lot in common, shared values, resilience, and a social conscience. I would say, of course, I'm a government official. Others may have different perspectives, but I would say we have a social conscience and are strong democracies who care about the future of our world and how we shape it. These are moments of profound change. They are global. There are shifting alliances, shifting perspectives. It feels as though it's sort of like sand shifting under our feet, what we're seeing today. And in these times, partnership and friendship between countries and between peoples means everything. We ground each other. When the Berlin Wall fell, Canada stood with Germany, not as a distant observer, but as a trusted partner. And at the Open Skies Conference in Ottawa, which helped launch the 2+4 process, Canada was the first NATO ally to formally support reunification. So we are in this era again now of systemic change. It's defined by many developments. Most of us read the news and know what some of them are. But what we are seeing, another shift, is really the rise of technological developments. And these technologies blur borders, identities, and have impacts, power impacts. AI is reshaping economies, democracies, the nature of human activity. And so it's natural that questions of sovereignty over data, over algorithms, over the public sphere, they're not abstract. These are urgent questions. And the way Canada and Germany and other like-minded approach these questions is with a shared convictions that technology must serve its people, not the other way around. That innovation must be grounded in rights, transparency, and democratic oversight. And that societies should be incubators of creativity, critical inquiry, and cultural expression. Marshall McLuhan, after whom this series is named, also understood that media are not just tools, they're environments. And AI is now the environment in which we're all learning to inhabit. In this space, I'll just say a few words because it is our 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations of this space where Canada and Germany are working quite closely. So on AI governance, digital policy, research partnerships, this is at universities, amongst scientists, artists, civil society, and also in government. There's a recognition that technology represents huge economic potential and commercial opportunity for our businesses and for our people. And we have to work together to ensure that it's managed responsibly. Canada and Germany also collaborate on energy transition, Arctic science, the defense of the rules-based international order. Perhaps it seems disorder at some points and at some times, but we both believe strongly in clarity of rules for our society, for behavior of states, and when it comes to trade, stability for our companies and economies. And we continue to learn from each other. Canada is here for Germany and Germany for Canada. I wanted to thank Transmediale for its long-standing partnership with Canada and for creating a space where the discussions like those today can happen. It's where critical thinking, creativity, and technological inquiry meet. So thank you. Thank you also to our speakers, two of whom have flown in from Canada for this. And I welcome you and thank you. And I look forward to tonight's discussion. So thank you, everyone. Vielen Dank. Merci beaucoup. Et encore, bienvenue. I wanted to pass the floor now to Juan Pablo.
Hi everyone, welcome, bienvenidos, karibu sana. My name is Juan Pablo Garcia Sosa, or Juan Pablo, or JPEX. Juan Garcia is my incognito name. It's a bit like Max Mustermann, it's very common. Juan Pablo Garcia Sosa is my full name, so JPEX is the compressed version of my name. You can call me either way you prefer. And I was born in Colombia. I grew up in Bogota, and I've been the past 12, almost 13 years between there and Berlin. So this is from where I speak. And I'm one of the two co-curators of this year's Transmediale, together with dear Nemagidere from Kenya, who is at another event at the moment, but you will get a chance to see us together tomorrow at our opening in Silent Green. And yeah, this edition, I'm gonna say briefly a few things about this edition of Transmediale by the Mango Belt and Tamarind Road, and then introduce and join our speakers for today's roundtable with a table or a little table. Semicircle or crescendo luna situation. By the Mango Belt and Tamarind Road, compassing, protocoling, and metaphoring has a wink to the One Belt, One Road initiative from China that often presents itself, especially in the tropics, in the tropical belt, as supposedly an alternative for so-called developing without the US America or the World Bank, but that ultimately this alternative falls to keep perpetuating similar or same dependency models. So this multipolarity that we currently experience perhaps isn't really redistributing in a pluriversal way, as the Zapatistas in Mexico will say, to be in a world where many worlds fit. But they keep perpetuating the same imperialistic formulas and models, recipes. And that's why we think, we believe that is not enough for us to diversify or change the ingredients or the data sets of our systems if we keep cooking only a la French or a la Greek or Italian. But maybe we shall shake the recipes or the models that are ultimately the relational aspect of these elements and the way they combine and come to each other and are being situated and presented and transformed. And so when thinking about AI sovereignty and infrastructuring also, and thinking what's underlying the constructs of our systems, what is sustaining these structures, and how could we think of them perhaps instead as holding structures or hanging structures to hold space and stretch time for exchange. Think of other relational architectures, and here I gotta think of a dear friend in Yucatan, Rafiki, which is interesting. Rafiki is also a friend in Kiswahili, but as the nickname he shows, we will spoke about the concept of La Casa Maya, that is a form of architecture in Yucatan. And interestingly, anthropologists come to these communities and territories pointing out that, hey, what's going on? You're not building anymore the Casa Maya. You're losing this heritage. To what communities reply, well, we're still doing Casa Maya, because Casa Maya is not about the way it looks. It's about that you build it with your neighbors. And these different codes of what is visible to some and what's invisible to others, and perhaps this grammatic aspect and syntaxis of how elements are coming into play and maybe manifest and are translated into technological protocols, it's something that is deeply present in our proposition by the Mango Belt and Tamarind Road, where we are playing a lot with formats to look at how we could condition us differently, playing a lot with language, to look how we could rewire the root codes of our systems or our behaviors, our bodies, our operating systems, our cosmos. And I'd just like to tell briefly and invite you to join us the next days. We have designed a program following a so-called high tide and low tide logic. A high tide is an amplified event focusing attention, performance, a talk, concert. And the low tide event is something that is not necessarily announced, but is happening in a parallel program in the in-between, in these different holding structures that artists have contributed with, and hanging structures where you can lie in hammocks and chapais and so on and so forth. So that's it. And so we break the monologue and make it more multilateral. I like to invite you to join us here, dear Camila, dear Lucas, dear Scott. and I'll just stick around. So we have originally thought of Camila like facilitating moderation in this conversation, this panel. We have reflected on it, and we'll have like to have Camila's practice and perspective more present in this conversation. So I'll be just sticking around and facilitating some connections, being el aglutinante en esto. And yeah, I'd like you to sit comfy and maybe, yeah, try the mics, of course. Oh, also, by the way, I think I do a lot of this with my mic, and my voice is very monotone and low, so please jaguar with me with that. But yeah, perhaps you could introduce by yourself and say something about your practice and where you're speaking from, and yeah, I'll pass the mic to you.
Sure. Thank you, JPEX. So my name is Camila Lombana Diaz. I'm a Colombian AI ethicist. I'm a Colombian diaspora. I left Colombia in 2002. So pretty much all my practice or reality has been in between identities, in between here and there, in between territories. And for longer than 10 years, I've been working in the industry as a AI ethics researcher and senior advisor for the industry. In the last years, I've been also collaborating with the Women for Ethical AI at the UN, and I've been also working on a project in Geneva around AI diplomacy, what those tracks can be and how we can develop diplomatic tracks on the development of AI. And parallel to my work in the industry as a researcher, the more I was doing this research in the industry, the more philosophical and epistemological questions start to come into my mind, because there are so many dilemmas that we still need to work with in the development and deployment of AI. And I started finding a lot of those answers with elders and indigenous people in Colombia, where I was able to start understanding a lot of the conversations that are not necessarily apply here, not only on how we are implementing ethical logics into the software, but also ethical logics into what we call sovereignty and governance of AI. So thank you for inviting me to speak from this perspective of Aini AI, which is the project that I've been doing with indigenous elders in Colombia, asking what are those dilemmas from an ethical epistemology that we should also consider in these roundtables here in Europe, that we sometimes not see, and we don't see not necessarily because we're evil, but because we're not really in allowing a pluriversal roundtable to accommodate those standards in which we're going to live eventually in the future with.
Miigwech. Buju, Benesiinaabandan Maengan Dodem, Ubishkong Donje, Winnipeg and Daya. My name is Scott. That was just a traditional protocol greeting. I'm Anishinaabe from Treaty 3 territory in northwestern Ontario. So that's basically my traditional greeting to territory. So I'm primarily a contemporary visual artist, but I'm also a co-investigator for an international AI project called Abundant Intelligences, and it's working with indigenous communities around the world, like New Zealand, Hawaii, United States, and Canada, and working with those communities to start looking at ways to implement indigenous knowledge systems into the algorithms and infrastructure that actually works for the community and not built outside of the community. So a lot of the work I do, or the interest that I have around AI outside of, and it's not really art related, but it's the philosophy of what is intelligent and what that looks like for the communities. And so one of the things working back in Winnipeg is working with my Anishinaabe community with language models. So what is it, because Anishinaabemowin is Anishinaabemowin just means the spoken Anishinaabe language, or better known as Ojibwe language. And one of the things that the problem with the large language models is that it doesn't, it's not very good with low parameter interpretations. And so we're looking at ways that Anishinaabe can be sort of working with AI so that our communities can take the benefits of AI in a better, more ethical, local sense of the world. Just that little anecdote, because we were told we have to speak in anecdotes. About 3 months ago, I sat down with my language teacher, Pat Ningwans. We went for breakfast, which a lot of the good work that we do in the community has to be over food. And so I told her about it. She's like 80 years old, but she's one of the preeminent language keepers in my community. And we were talking about it, and she came right away at breakfast. She said, I came because I respect you, but I don't love AI. And so right off the bat, so I said, okay, I'm not here to like try to convince you. And she goes, well, I don't hate AI. I just don't want my grandchildren to be taught by robots. And so that's always kind of guided me in terms of the work I do with the language and with AI models. And so I kind of have to respect that the elders' perspective on these things and sort of work within that framework of the local community and what its needs are and what its wants are. And so that always sort of informs all the work I do. So, any questions?
I'm Lucas LaRochelle. I am a designer, an artist, and a technologist. And I run a platform called Queering the Map, which is a community-generated countermapping platform for archiving queer and trans experience in relation to physical space. And it's a project that I've been running for almost 10 years now, and it's grown very large. There's just about 850,000 submissions in 28 languages across the world. And for the past 5 years, I've been working on a project called QTBot, which is a suite of machine learning tools to work with the different data sets from this project. And it emerges, that project emerges twofold, and my interest in AI emerges twofold. Firstly, in response to generating this really large collective data set and feeling ambivalent towards particularly the academic gaze trying to make sense of what is happening on this platform rather than thinking with each individual story as a form of knowledge in and of itself. And then exploring large language models that the purpose of which is to find the mean inside of these data sets. So what would it then, which is antithetical to the mission of the project. And so then what would it mean to use AI against AI to increase the opacity or increase the multiplicity of the kinds of knowledge that this crowdsourced project is generating. And so that has taken me from working more in a design and infrastructure space into more of an artistic space. And so QTBot has taken the form of a lot of billboard installations, video works, and a strange merch line of which there's images floating through here. Yeah, and that's what I'll say to start. That's where I'm speaking from today.
Yes, thank you so much to you all. Perhaps we could, before we go into more mangrove and intersecting each other, perhaps we could begin by finding a semi-common, elastic, common understanding of sovereignty. And here, maybe I'd like to share also one word that a dear friend, Vicky Carato, from the Orinoco region, taught me. It's cape cape, and cape cape could be translated to self-determination, which could relate potentially to the idea of being sovereign or sovereignty and digital sovereignty. But cape cape also means the first flight of a butterfly. And this is something that cannot be literally translated. And here I think also something we spoke before about how certain languages are more action-based, and you cannot literally translate certain concepts, but you need to enact them or perform them or execute them in a way. But yeah, I'm curious to know what would be your perspectives on that, also from your practices by using crowdsourced data sets, or like working with large language models, or also from more policy-making perspective, but also with your research with elders in the Andes and Amazon.
Well, my experience with AI sovereignty.
Sorry, I want to say
Yes,
one last thing. Maybe we can reframe interruptions as intersections, so you are free also to jump to each other. Like, doesn't have to be necessarily so like
Formal. Exactly. No worries. We get it.
It's not a thing of formality, but I think it's grammatic again. But go on, please.
I mean, my experience with AI sovereignty has been a very practical one, because I've been involved in defining what would be sovereignty in terms of software, sovereignty in terms of AI governance, and but I think what has been missing, I mean, also just to say, I mean, I think sovereignty talks a lot about agency, right? And then when we're speaking about agency, it's not only the agency in terms of nations or in terms of politics, it's also individual, it's me as a citizen, it's me as a consumer in the AI. There's different fragmentations about what this sovereignty can be. But I think like the majority of the topics, at least on the last years in Europe, has been really about sovereignty in terms of software, right? So it's been exactly like cloud sovereignty or data center sovereignty, and topics that are really software related. But AI has a humongous problem as well on infrastructure. And when we also understand that AI is not only a software topic, but also an infrastructure topic, then things get a little bit more complex. And that's where I started receiving all of this information from my elders, where they were saying, we need to proclaim the right of disconnectivity. We need to understand what would be like new design rights that we need to put on the table. And one of those rights has to be the right to disconnection. Because where they're coming from is that there are specific areas, territories that you would say are holy territories. I don't like using that word, but just as an explanation. Because those territories are the ones that allow us to live in this earth. It's territories that create water, it's territories that clean the air, it's territories that we are all interconnected to those territories. So if we're seeing these type of territories just as a way of extraction, then everybody's going to pay the price. So understanding this connectivity and starting speaking about what it means to disconnect, it goes even further, because it's not only the disconnection of those areas that would need to be managed without internet, without digitalization, but also what it means for me, for example, if I die, what are my rights of disconnecting in my death? What are my agency around the disconnectivity of my identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there on, we're seeing the topic of AI, agency and AI, sovereignty, from a spectrum that is wider, because right now, you know, if you look, for example, at OECD definitions, you know, or things like that. It's like everybody needs to be connected, right? You see richness around how much people have electricity, how much people have access to the internet. And we're speaking about, for example, data gaps and data literacy. But there are people, organizations, communities that do not want to be defined in that way. They don't want to have electricity. They don't want to have connectivity. They don't see the safety or the interest, what you were saying, for example, in being connected. But this is something that we're not allowing to be involved in the debate. So it goes a little bit with the opacity that you were speaking just now.
Kind of makes me think about in Manitoba, there's still fly-in communities that are only connected seasonally through the air and then sometimes through ice roads. And the conversation around those are still about what is allowed in the community, is it controlled by the community? And so I guess there's some fear around the sovereignty of who has access to the community. And so there's still fights about having a road built directly to the community. And so the community is thinking, well, with the road comes lots of harmful things like alcohol, like industry, like all these things. And I think the fear that I hear often in Indigenous communities about AI is that extension of that sort of extractive process, right? As soon as you get a road into communities, you allow, by just consent or just because it's there, the access is there, more exploitative and extractive processes like water management, like silica mining, like rare earth mineral mining, and oftentimes those exist almost exclusively across the globe, probably on Indigenous territories, right? And so I think when I think about sovereignty, we always go back to like sitting down with my elder who doesn't, the elder language keeper, she has no real interest in technology from the computers on up to AI. And so she'll always just say, books and paper is my technology and that's what I'm comfortable with. And I think, but you have to still sit and get that perspective because that's where the sovereignty comes from those older people, the people with knowledges, the people with the stories and the authority to accept it into the community, you know? And I think that part of that process is, you know, Canada and the Indigenous people have a long history of sort of volatile negotiations around sovereignty. And so I think it's easy to slide this into just another sort of form of sovereignty debate in issues around the water and the land and the wildlife management and all these things. So I think when we talk about how Indigenous communities are going to incorporate, like say, data plants, data centers, data banks, or whatever, data centers. And the discussions around that in terms of bringing up data centers and having an economic boon in our communities, but initially what they need to do is really negotiate directly with First Nations, however small that might be, but they must have full jurisdiction and control over what that might look like for them, and they must benefit 100% from those things. And it can't happen. And if the community says, no, I don't want it, like my elder is like she said, no, I don't want to hear about your AI dreams about our language, she's fine with that. So you have to respect those things, but I think sovereignty eventually and exclusively comes to the point of access and who has control over that access point within our communities.
I'm curious, how has it been for you, dear Lucas, also like working with your own data sets and also like maybe I'm not so familiar with what specific foundational model you're using or if there have been open source versions of that. I'm thinking also of the potentiality of federated AI systems or like how they could be like, we are not only looking for declarations of independence, but rather declarations for interdependence or how they like connect to each other in a patchworky, quilty way. But yeah, anyways, like to hear from you, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is also one of the things that drew me to working with machine learning was the possibility of putting this really huge collection of knowledge in conversation with one another. So they exist sort of in this they're in this collectivity, but they're still individual. They're bumping up against one another in relation to the different pins, the different stories. And working with machine learning poorly, which is to say training a model up to the point where it still fails to generate things that are entirely coherent, but we're still imposing a kind of meaning onto them, became, a way of forging new kinds of relationships between knowledge that is so situated in relationship to geography and context with other geographies and contexts. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm also like thinking of like this right for disconnection and like the right to be like to what extent we like to participate in the current given conditions, or how could we like envision, design, and craft like our own terms and conditions, because it's also not only like an opt-out situation potentially, and like I'm curious like what could be the potentiality of rating these other versions of AI systems as abundant intelligences and all these like twists that have been done. But yeah, I wonder if you have like some takes of what practices could be translated into protocols, and does it make sense? Like where I like to.
I mean, I'm going to be very practical because I don't do an artistic practice around AI. So
Welcome. Also.
So for me, you know, like at least in my practice, or the dilemmas that I had to partake is the fact that, I mean, I never call AI intelligent. Let's start from there. I mean, AI, we can debate and make it pretty. I think it's a manipulation of the term, because I mean, yes, it's a statistical machine, and large language models know exactly what is the next word that it's going to use and everything. But I mean, these machines, they only understand metrics, right? So whatever you're going to put out there, it's just going to be putting out there not only the information that is going to get in, which is information that is usually not pluriversal, but also it's going to speak out that lack of pluriversality, but also, for example, these machines and stuff, they're not safe, because in order to be able to create this as a safety mechanism or fair mechanism or private mechanism or any of those AI ethics principles that we have, we would need to define those specific metrics. And what we're trying to define is like things like dignity, fairness, transparency. Those are inherent human principles and values. Like, how do you say, okay, transparency can be measured from this and this, right? And then therefore this is transparent, or therefore this is fair. And this is where those dilemmas come, and where I always specify this is not intelligent. Somebody is taking a decision making to say, okay, this AI use cases is getting out of on the market, and it's fair, and we are compliant, and we can be audited, and we say that we have tested for fairness, but what are those metrics for fairness? So I think in that way, you know, like we have humongous problems with the standardization. We need a standardization, but then who is deciding for this standardization, and who will be affected by those decision makings, right? I mean, I can definitely say that I've been in plenty of AI use cases that I have to study, where every time I have to say, you haven't tested for they, them. There's no they, them testing for this and this and this and this. And you cannot be just one person that is
Yeah.
saying, you're not testing this, this has to be systematic.
I think I'm very curious exactly of like this, how like to have a consensus or like think of a kind of standardization that is not a universal system or is not like homogenizing in a melting pot, but that could be a bit more masala perhaps, like could be composed in million ways, but yet we can still refer to it as this combination of spices. And how can you like translate again like knowledges, situated knowledges that are more tacit, you know, that are not quantifiable, or and what's also the como reconciliar eso.
Thinking about that, I think me and my colleagues were thinking about this in Austin one year, and we were writing a paper on it, and we came to this conclusion, kind of wrapped back again around the idea of intelligent, and really question it being, you know, what is intelligence? What is the model trying to emulate within? What is it trying to achieve? And one of the things is that the dominant Western idea of intelligence is bigger, more knowledge hoarding, more parameters get you to something that looks like intelligence. And we realize at the very core, it's a kind of a misplaced premise in indigenous communities, because intelligence is only, because our Anishinaabe is a very verb-based language. We can noun any verb, but it's not the way we usually talk. So it's always about the action that we're doing. It's always about, what are you doing now? What are you doing? You're not something, you are what you're doing at the moment. And so that kind of intelligence, you know, is about what we do. And sort of for Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, we're kind of guided by 7 main premises. And one of those premises is kindness and truth. And I think if you ask anybody in our communities who is a leader, who is intelligent, it's really about how we employ those base ethics and base morals and base ideas about what it means to be a good person. And I think how we deploy, how we interact with technologies, is it good for communities? Is it kind to the communities? Is it, you know, does it provide us something strong, you know? And if we start from those positions and sort of build out smaller scale infrastructure, like local domain infrastructure within the community, controlled by the community and dictated by the community from the ground up and from the beginning, that we can sort of encode those intelligences within the code. I think what you're talking about in terms of the ethics get built into the algorithm from the start up. And sort of it's a rejecting of, you know, this nuclear war for the big 4 LLMs are for the billion parameters, the AGI, right? I don't think any of the communities that I work with or I've talked to is looking to do AGI. The practicalities of it are what? You know, to go to the Mars, to colonize Mars, I don't understand. And we don't understand that. But what we do understand is the need for our languages not to go extinct anymore. And what can we use for these small scale, community-driven server farms and data centers controlled by us? And how will that help our future kids be better people and better Anishinaabe in the future? So I think just starting from those nature of what is intelligent is a way to encode the practice of being Anishinaabe into the algorithm.
I think from what you have mentioned, it sounds very ecosystemic to me already, and it makes me think also of like the notions of summa causae or the buen vivir in the Andes, so like one of the many post-development alternates or options that are offered from within the tropical belt, here specifically from the Andes region. And I'm curious, dear Lucas, if like, because also like your querying the map is so multi-situated already, and like have already that like when we look at these many dots, if you have recognize like different patterns that allow this multi-situateness, or like if they are like coming together in a more homogeneous way. Like I'm curious of the heterogeneity of that, and if it's like if it allows like the current models you're working with, and yeah, I'll just like to know like how this manifests.
Yeah, I guess the main thing is that it highlights the lyric structure of how people are writing on querying the app. So there's almost always a subject of address, and one of the things that I've been interested in when I've been training the models is splitting the subject of address, so there becomes multiple, or like the context, the geography, the subject position of the subject of address is constantly shifting. But the experiment is a failure if it becomes overdetermined. So if it gets too close to something that could pass as a story written by a human, that's not my interest at all.
I guess like I'm asking this also like intersecting in a way like Scott's anecdotes and research on action-based languages, and it makes me think of Lingala in DR Congo, that is also an action-based language, and how these points and ecologies or landscapes without a D, but more like a local area network escape, VLAN, that look very different in North America, but then also in the African continent could, like, if there's a possibility of a multi-situateness, that's also something that interests us when we think of the tropical belt, and how both we in Colombia and Philippines kiss the direction, we point at things with our lips, and we are like at in antipodes, opposite sides of the planet. We've been very curious about these alliances or connections that go sometimes beyond language or religions, or and even climates sometimes.
In one of the early programs that we were thinking about developing, we did a workshop in Hawaii with the Hawaiian community, and in the indigenous communities in Canada, pointing the lips is a big thing, right? Like everything is this, everything is that, because it's kind of like you don't want to point at somebody, but it's like, you know, to try to talk about somebody. You're just like, someone walks by, you don't want to be talking about it. It's just, you know. So we thought, you know, that would be the best way to like do an app that sort of could read your lip pointing, you know, so it could translate, you know, hands free, right? It's like, you know, so it's out, and I know lip pointing or nodding or like, and the thing about language, I believe, you know, that AI really doesn't try to, I haven't heard of it, to address, is that, you know, people talk with their face, people talk with their hands, their bodies. It's not literally just the text that comes out of your mouth, right? And so I think, and people are like, oh, well, it's going to take the soul of the language if it's just the text. Well, the soul of the language, the spirit of the language comes through us. You know, it comes through the body that incorporates it and then manifests it back out into the world. And I think working with all these different communities from around the world, that's sort of like, the fear is not, the fear is like there's a connection between all these communities, and it's not just indigenous communities, but there's lots of communities that are connected by more things than just the technical layer or the technological stack that we're using to engage with AI. And I think that it'd be interesting to bring more, like I think that there's a big gap in our programming in terms of north-south relationships, especially with Africa, South America. And it could be a language thing, I'm not sure about those things, but I think that there should be more work in terms of solidarity with those communities and developing those low resource language models, and then seeing what is the best practice, and then developing infrastructure that we can all depend on, that is sort of keeps the sovereignty within our communities, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is like keep the sovereignty with our communities and not, give it to Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whatever to further their agendas, right?
Perhaps we could think of liquidity and not something that solidifies like social cohesion, but actually like maybe makes it flow and not stagnated. And how about you, dear Camila, like, because you're also coming from like, in a way, like more top-down scenarios or contexts with the policy making, if like, what will be your take in a like multi-situated policy making, or if there like could be ways to maybe creolize or pidginize systems to bridge them and merge them and develop then other languages that are, I don't know, like.
I mean, with the languages, that would go too far from me. I mean,
But generally also like in the like framing the conditions in the act of.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say that at least from the conversations that I've been having in the last 6 years, what is missing, and that's why I always say, like, yes, we have definitely a problem in AI in the software part, what we call intelligence, but if we desperately need to shift that as well into an infrastructure conversation, right? And the majority of the policies that are being developed or implemented, AIU Act, which is the one here in Europe, or even principles, either the principles of the OECD or the UN, because there are plenty, right? I mean, but those principles are not binding. That means that the governments, they don't, or the companies, they don't need to have them by law, just the one right now with the AIU Act. They totally miss that part, right? That part of the infrastructure, let's put it this way, like sandwich of AI, right? Because there's very different layers. And at least I think that's very crucial if we want to build an AI that it's fair and sustainable, because the truth is that the majority of the AI is not automated, right? I mean, when we talk about data is being managed and done and by hand, by labor. That's AI labor. When we're talking about anonymization, which is exactly what we need to do in order to protect our data, that's being done by anonymization farms. When we're talking about content moderation, we're talking about content moderation farms, et cetera, et cetera. And because we are seeing AI just as a software problem, then all of that layers of sandwich gets completely out of either regulation that creates dignity to this part that actually makes automation possible, but also it allows us not to see the big ecosystem that AI actually needs to have in order to exist, right? So I don't know if that actually answers what you're saying, but what I'm just trying to say is that I invite you guys to see this as something that it's a lot more wider than just LLMs. LLMs is really just the cherry on top of a humongous ecosystem. We're talking about machine learning algorithms, deep learning. We're talking about narrow AI. We're talking about symbolic AI. We're talking about so many different types of AI that need labor to exist. Automation is really, in many ways, just a myth. So, yeah, if that answers.
We're not looking for answers, but replies and responses.
As responses listed.
With multiple responses, not a single answer for the complexities of our planet. But like, if we allow also this diversion or detour, also like I find very relevant and interesting these more invisible aspects of the AI ecosystems that you have mentioned. Much has been said about like the ecological implications of like sustaining and training these models. But then there's also, of course, this human labor in content moderation that also, interestingly, most of it is also happening in Colombia and Kenya as laboratories of modernity in a way. And there will be also a chance, actually Camila is gonna participate in a conversational panel in Silent Green addressing this more specifically together with Kiria from Kenya. And it's still like maybe I have like this hyperfixation at the moment of like the gestural or the behavioral or how like things algorithms are not only the invisible things, but also like what are how could we sustain our constructs otherwise, or how could we look for other assemblies and configurations of like coming together, and not only in these given conditions, but also, or how could we redirect also perhaps some of the, not the new conditions, but like, I'm thinking of a brief chat we had with Manthia Dawara, a filmmaker from Mali, in which Manthia was interested in how maybe orality could gain a new momentum, and how in the Malian context, with the arrival or the maybe imposition or a reposition of scripts and books, it was said at the time that maybe orality will fade away, but orality is also another way where we can like explore the quantum state of memory, and like the knowledges that are not meant to be preserved, but maybe performed and enacted. And so there was like, in his perspective, an opportunity or a changing scenario that maybe has been also fueled by WhatsApp voice messages that tropicals do like a lot. And I'm curious how this speech and chatbots and oralities could also be changing our relational behaviors, or if indeed our conducts and ways of thinking and operating could become more oral in a way. I don't know. It's just like something we've been thinking about recently. Well, yeah.
A little bit about orality, I guess. One of the two things I'm thinking about black boxes. I've been thinking about black boxes a lot. And initially, I was fascinated by the fact that we're at an age of technology that we have where magic seems to be the best answer they have for what's going on in those algorithms, right? Even the engineers don't really know what's going on in there because it's, you know, it's beyond their comprehension. It's a black box. But also, I think that stuff is pretty mysterious and like interesting in and of itself, that they've programmed something that is too complex to discern yet. There's no apparatus to discern it yet. But also, in terms of just relating to your own community, I think talking about the supply chains and those hidden natures, that the black box on a social historical level is expanded way beyond just the algorithmic black box. And I think some of the pushback I get in the community is because you know, technology has been used against indigenous communities for a long time. And that's part of that sort of fear that we have to sort of deal with, and not just to like jump over and say, that was before times, you know, now we're gonna deal with this new fear. And so I always have to be conscious about how to reduce the black box that they're considering in a careful and I mean a careful, like with kindness and care to reduce that, and so acknowledging those historical sort of situations where technology was already used against us, right? Well, yeah, what was the question? Sorry, what was the conversation? I was the black box. I was thinking black box, so I just wanted to get it out there.
Like I'm thinking, like how, like we shape technologies after certain metaphors, and technologies shape us recursively, or our conducts and behaviors, and
Morality.
like been thinking of like chatting with friends and colleagues in Kinshasa, and finding like actually quite interesting the possibility of having these more conversational interfaces that relate more to sharing stories around fire than the most common or canonical architecture where knowledge is configured and validated, as in a library or an archive, or and so on and so forth. So I'm like curious, and like also like speculating real time, like if there's a potentiality of like these conversational interfaces like changing our behaviors and conducts, like maybe directing us to other places we haven't been before, and how this could be yeah, like how could we reappropriate in a way these interfaces, and like redirect it to other logics. If that, yeah.
Yeah, that you filled me in. Sorry. I kind of think.
Don't feel bad.
So working with working with the language idea, one of the big things. So we're very lucky as the Ojibwe People's Dictionary online is a very comprehensive Anishinaabe dictionary, and it gives you a lot of grammatical and sort of etymological sort of information there. And so, what the problem is that it lacks sort of lots of different features that would be very useful as a language learner and a language revitalization. And one of the crazy things, and I think this is one of the benefits of AI, is that this vibe coding thing, where you can get it to actually make technological tools tailored to you personally, but also to your immediate community, and then to your community that's bigger than that. And just to test it out, I added like translation features to it just to see if it was working. And you can't get that anywhere online, but I have it on my phone now, so I can translate Anishinaabe fairly well, not perfectly, and I would never put that in public. But for me as a learner, I can use that now, and that was a very custom tool for me. Right? It's very in the moment, and I could sit down with a elder who has issues with their fear about it, and I can like vibe code an app that works really well for her as a teacher, and it's very particular and very protected for them. And I think that if you wanted to make a conversational translation app or something, like there's always that possibility now with the sort of ease of coding with the vibe code, just tell it what to do, you know? And your imagination is really kind of the limits on that one. But so far, I think as a language tool, I think in conversational and those things, I think that's one of the bright spots, I guess, if I haven't, of the technology.
I'll be curious to hear you, Lucas, also like our current explorations related to disassociation that I think like kind of like appeal to these different like implications, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it does. The question of orality makes me think of in the video work that I do with QTBot. One of the most important parts of it is so all of this text is generated, and then I curate a selection of text, and then I recite the texts that are then inside of these video works. And I think part of it is as machine learning tools have become more accessible, as someone who loves language so much, I feel like it feels like it's the death of language of text on the internet. And in rereading these texts that are meaningless, that come from nowhere. It feels like a process of trying to imbue them with meaning to counter the state of dissociation that is feeling inundated with machine-generated text all over the internet.
I do have a question. We had sort of conversated a little bit over coffee, but can you get a little bit more in depth about the elders' concerns about disconnection and how that relates to the deeper context than just turning off your computer?
Right. I mean, part of the conversation comes because at least near Bogota, there's a territory that is called Páramo. And the Páramo is what our elders call the uterus of the world. So it's called the uterus of the world because it's one of the areas where water is actually created from the invisible. So water is created from the particles of the fog, and then it's really high altitude. We're talking beyond 3,500 meters in the tropics. There's not necessarily snow there, but there will be. I mean, we have snow above 5,000 meters, but just in between, it's like a machine of water creation. And that water that is there accumulated is where actually then it goes to the Amazon basin. So, like rivers are born in the air and in the mountains that absorb, et cetera, et cetera. So if the uterus dries out, the Amazon dries out, well, we are all for a nice treat. So pretty much what they say is that these and that, like ecosystems like this, they don't only exist in Colombia, they exist in many countries as well. But those ecosystems, because we do not have, we have a narrative of the earth territory as this is my land, this is your land, this is here, Grenze, mine, yours. We don't see the interconnectivity of these very fragile ecosystems that are maintaining life. So it is crucial for them to understand that, to make understand that digital transformation, which has been the agenda for the last decade across, like, we're going to put intranet everywhere, and we'll be, in the statistics, we're going to say that everybody has connection to the internet, which means that then everybody's on first world country, whatever, they are challenging that narrative. They're saying that doesn't work. We do not want that. We do not want to be connected to this part of this earth, which we have been exploring with indigenous elders in India, in Kenya, in Patagonia, in whatever. These places, it's, I think, 21 places that needs to be protected with complete sovereignty of not being connected. And that has, from that need or that desire, has kind of like created a snowball, in that it becomes also, okay, if we're talking that these territories should not be connected, what does it mean for us also as nations? What does it mean for us also as citizens? What does it mean for us also as consumers? And it has kind of created like a big discourse that was completely overseen, because the discourse has always been who reaches first the digital transformation. So that's why these narratives, pluralistic narratives, I find they're crucial, because they are showing where the gaps are in the development of AI, and where those gaps could be intended for very interesting innovation, real innovation.
Now with what you're saying, I'm thinking of the notion of ownership, and like how ownership doesn't translate or mean necessarily property that cannot be transgressed, but in many endemic communities in Abya and Turtle Island, ownership relates more to the right to take care of a place or a landscape, to steward for it. And I'm curious also, like, how when we think of an digital sovereignty or an AI sovereign system, maybe it shouldn't be reduced, or it doesn't imply only that is a property that shouldn't be transgressed, but is maybe then reframed as a field that you take care of.
I'm getting eyeballs that we need to.
Yeah, we can the eyeballs.
Can we, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps we can open the round table, the crescendo, to the audience.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm conscious of this being so intriguing, and we have so many people in the room that I think have probably been really stimulated by the discussion. So we'll maybe, if it's okay, open it up for a few questions. We have 2 microphones. There's one on that side and one on that side, with friendly embassy colleagues who are happy to bring them to you. And we would love to open the floor for the first brave soul that wishes to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks for the interest talk. Maybe I have this question. Can you give a clear definition of what do you think is intelligence in artificial intelligence and what intelligence should be? Because we're talking about language, right? And all the definitions and all these language games, yeah. So we can have like a basis of understand where it goes. Thanks.
I don't think we need to look for the intelligence in automated machines. I think it's just automation. Automation doesn't need to be intelligent. I mean, it needs to be safe. It needs to be ethical. It needs to be rightly programmed. It needs to be efficient, but it doesn't need to be intelligent. I know it's a weird take to put out there, but many experts call them just automated systems, not artificial intelligence, and I prefer to go in that direction.
I think it's a shame that it got co-opted, like the artificial intelligence early on, and now kind of half the battle is to undo that time in terms of the vernacular we're using around this. And talking about as machine learning is a lot more honest way of encountering these models. And I think for us as Indigenous people and working with our communities, like, approaching it that way is a more intelligent way than starting off with the baggage of language.
Yeah, I would say that any intelligence is not coming from the machine, but rather what kind of meaning we're reading into it, which is why it's concerning when we assume that the agency of intelligence is coming from the machine first.
And I also, just to circle down, I also think that it's very complex, because what we're doing right now is that we are allowing just very singular companies to define what intelligence is. And we do not have a consensus, not even philosophically, about what intelligence actually is. But we are accepting that, some specific companies to define that intelligence, and then we're reacting to that. And I think we should be careful if even philosophers or neuroscientists cannot even define what intelligence is or come into a common consensus. I think we should be also knowledgeable on the manipulation of utilizing those words.
Yeah, maybe. This is a question like, how far does the sovereignty of these 21 places. You discovered how far does it go of not being connected? Is it just related to that shouldn't be touched by technology, that technology shouldn't be used in these places, or does it even go so far that the knowledge about these places doesn't go into that intelligent system? You know, is it like how far does this already go?
It's a good question. I think right now, at least the conversations that I've been having is that technology shouldn't penetrate those systems because technology needs a lot of water, technology needs a lot of, electricity, it creates also a lot of gases, etc. I think that's the real sovereignty, giving agency of deciding of those territories whether they also want to be digitalized in data or not. And if sovereignty really exists, I think we could even go into those minimum levels, atomic levels of agency in general. I mean, there's a lot that it's not being fed into the system, right? I mean, we have more than 20% of data gap in the world, and there's humongous levels of I can imagine, for example, the Tibetan library, or there's a lot of knowledge, human knowledge, that hasn't been digitalized yet.
But in a way that we need some other ways of thinking to get out our modern box, like to save ourselves from this box in which we are blocked. Maybe those communities can be turned into our friend out of the box, helping us to think differently. I'm thinking about Rousseau having meetings with the Indians and coming back to France, launching the French Revolution. So, and ChatGPT being my friend when I'm very lonely. So maybe I can have a native friend who can help me to think differently, or maybe a queer friend which can help me to think differently, open my box before I go out in the world and spread those new ideas I got from those people which are luckily out of the box.
I mean, I think that's an answer to a lot of problems, is to listen to other perspectives, So I don't have any direct solutions for like immediate to that, but I mean, always, there's always welcomes to be, I think we use the term allyship in Canada. I don't know if you use that here, but to be allies to other communities is the best way to like learn with them.
I mean,
is there a way that they accept to play this game, also to save humanity in some ways? To use their knowledge in a way to enlighten the modern people that are dying, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's about what's the access point to the community, right? Like it's about, are you extracting that knowledge, whether that's going to AI or just to learn something about the environment? The scientists, always extracted stuff from the indigenous communities. So there's a way of being an ally and being a friend and not being a commercial agent to extract certain solutions and whatnot. So I think, yes, there's always ways to build good relationships, It's just it takes a long time. Time is the commodity that we need.
I mean, and we also need it in terms of standardization, right? Because, for example, when we talk about fairness in algorithms, I mean, the reason why all of these algorithms actually actively discriminate minorities is because there is no data from minorities. So you also need to integrate them, but like you said, those integrations need to be from allyships and not from, taking.
Yeah, I was thinking about the community building their own shelf, their own robots to enlighten, not being done by Microsoft or I don't know who, but maybe someone from the community decided to control and give this tool to humanity.
Right. I mean, that's also why organizations such as, for example, UNESCO, like they have created a lot of frameworks around, for example, to evaluate, how much each country has the capacity of that digitalization, etc., and all that information has been coming from civic society. So it has been more than 10 years work that has been done from bottom-up approaches from civic societies, right? To see what data is missing, to whatever, but this is also a humongous effort also by countries like Canada or whatever to even create the infrastructure to allow those data to exist, because data at the end, it's an artifact, it's a human artifact. We are creating those data, right? But we are naming it data to neutralize it and not giving it rights, not giving it, you see what I mean? It's also how we're using that language of digitalization.
I have a question about this concept of, one, I guess, like fear that I heard mentioned a few times in relation to how Indigenous elders are feeling about AI, and also kind of wondering also about goals, because I feel like throughout the talk, when we heard like anecdotes about conversations with elders, there are concerns such as, I don't want my grandchildren to learn from a machine instead of community, or there are concerns about like, will we have the ability to disconnect? And all of these, kind of the constellation of them sounds like no. And that like a kind of sketch of what sovereignty means sounds like it's predominantly questions around the ability to say no and the capacity to say no. And so I'm curious where the like forward momentum comes from to have these initiatives about integrating AI with Indigenous communities, and like what philosophy underpins those. Because I heard a little bit about kind of like the economic, like the potential like economic benefits of perhaps like data centers, et cetera. But I'm curious, yeah, like is there like an imagined vision of like concrete positives that having automated systems like more integrated into communities could bring, and where I feel like there are like typical like capitalist ideologies that, you know, we hear commonly about like, oh, better, faster, like finish your work faster, but that doesn't seem so necessarily aligned with what you guys are talking about. Are these kind of values that are, you know, the values that are trying to rein in these systems and companies out of control? So I would be really curious to hear more about what those like what those top line principles are that have started the conversations.
I think one of the things is that AI or artificial intelligence has only come to like the popular mainstream consciousness in the past like 10 years or something like that. But we've been using data or machine learning for forest fire management and water management and wildlife conservation and all these different things that we just never called it artificial intelligence, right? So I think these things have been employed in our communities for the care of the environment, for the care of the community, for the care of our future generations for a long time. And I think part of the solution for the fear that we're talking about is to dismantle, to talk about AI in a more community-driven way, to say that we've always used technology. And so for the Anishinaabe, like we always have to say that we were, you know, early adopters of lots of technology in Canada for the Western migration. We were the early adopters for the steam engine technology for agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. So reminding our own communities that technology is not to be feared, it's to be sort of understood and deployed for us and in the best interest of a community. So I think that sort of community care is a sort of philosophy that sort of can help usher in new technologies into the community.
I think you said something very interesting that touches a very epistemological question, and I think right now we are in kind of an epistemological war. You said about going fast. You said about like, oh, this is fast, whatever. We are designing automation to be efficient, to be fast, to have very restrictive principles, right? Or values, yeah? If we go out of those epistemologies, right? If we go out about the wheel of making everything just efficient, but making things, for example, safe, making things, for example, ethical, making things, for example, dignified, then we are allowing ourselves to look for ways to find solutions that are guiding by a different type of epistemological principles. And this is what we are right now not allowing ourselves to do, right? So these are the conversations. For example, I'm gonna, now that you wanted anecdotes, so I was speaking with Isaías Guacamayo. He's, I would say, like one of the eminences of Yajé ayahuasca in the Putumayo area of Colombia. And I was asking him, like, okay, what would be like your ethical understanding of AI? And having that conversation with somebody like him, he's 65 years old, he's been an ayahuasca elder since he's 4 years old. It's very difficult because he doesn't live in this world, right? So you have to translate many concepts. And one of the things he said is like, we need to find a way to have conversations between the sky and between the earth. And I asked him, like, what do you mean with that? And then he said, well, because technology, it's being downloaded from the sky, right? I mean, we have the satellites, we have everything that is going there. Like, if I am lost, I look at Google Maps, and Google Maps tell me where I go. It's information that is coming from the sky. But if I'm here in the jungle, in Putumayo, I know exactly where to go. I do not need Google Maps. I know where the north is, where the south is, where to sit, where to go. I know exactly how to have conversation with the star, with the trees, and I have complete a compass where I am, and I'm never lost. So we need to understand how not to get lost with the information from the sky, but to have a dialogue with what we know from the earth without losing the feet that we have in the earth. And I thought it was a very beautiful metaphor, because this, for me, like I said, it changes the epistemology. It means, like, what can we bring from this understanding of the earth, because we still need to have the conversation from the information that we were downloading from the sky. And I thought it was very interesting aspect.
Lucas, did you want to weigh in on that? Do you have any thoughts? I just want to make space for you to answer if you wish.
I'm still resonating with what you just said.
Yeah. That was pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
We did start a little bit late, so I think we're over, but we could probably take another question if there's one in the room. Yeah? Great. Hi.
I think my question is a bit of a, like, in this sort of age of, like, the disillusionment of international law, tech accelerationism, so if there's, is there even an option to sort of disregard the, like, okay, yeah, algorithms and algorithmically mediated sort of solutions have been there since forever. It wasn't called artificial intelligence, I understand that part. But for the future, is there even an option to sort of not keep up with the flow? That's sort of the dilemma that I have in my mind. Is it imposed upon us? Nowadays, internet is a human right. You need access to this technology to sort of keep up. So it's the same question that comes to my mind with artificial intelligence. Is it even an option to not use it? Are you sacrificing too much? Will these communities be left behind? In terms of classical artificial intelligence, LLMs, sort of these models that are more advanced, that's sort of the, yeah, what's rattling in my brain. Like, these conversations are important to have, but in terms of pragmatism, sort of political realism, how does it play out in your opinions?
Yeah, I have the same question, and I don't know the answer. I feel like that's what draws me to, we were talking about this before, that it's strange working with a technology that in most cases I vehemently dislike and am deeply anxious about. And yet it's that negative drive that is what brings me to work with it, because there is a sense that, not that it's inevitable, and I don't think that it is inevitable, but it does feel like it is an intense imposition. And so trying to find ways of understanding it through art making feels like it will, get us closer to if there is an answer to that question. But I don't have an answer.
I think it's right now we cannot go into black and whites. I think it's really a lot about like literacy, like really understanding what AI literacy is, how to use it well, how to support software that is regulated instead of software that doesn't want to be regulated, even if it feels uncomfortable. Like I recently changed from Spotify to Qobuz, at the beginning was like, okay, what am I doing? Now I'm totally in for that, It's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable and starting to really understand how, what are we using and how. Because like I that's why I like the Isaías Wacamayo example. It's a conversation. It's like, let's bring a new conversation, epistemological conversation. Can I go slower on this? Can I go maybe what these guys are doing beauty around it, right? Participation around it. I think there are ways, but we need literacy.
Thank you so much to the panel, to our moderator, to the audience who has made time, that is a precious commodity, made time tonight to come to the embassy and share in this conversation, which you underlined is important. This is a conversation. A few things that I noted that I think are really, that I'm taking away is just the notion of interrogating things, interrogating assumptions about this. I think defining intelligence and not taking for granted that if we're told that's what it is, that's what it is really important. And the point about encoding not only through technology but through behavior, I think is really powerful. And so on that note, with also thanks to the embassy team who has helped put this together and deliver tonight, I would like us to continue the conversation and encode through behavior on exchanging and interrogating outside. We have a little bit of refreshments, we have some wine, and we would invite you to stay before you go out into the cold and battle the Verkehrsmittel, which is definitely a little slower than normal, but it will be worth your time. So thank you again very much for joining us this evening, and enjoy the rest of the Transmediale Festival.
Thank you guys all very much.